something extraordinary is happening. A move so big, so historic, that Washington's top analysts are calling it the end of the dollar age. For over 80 years, the United States dollar has ruled the world. From oil to trade, every major transaction went through it. It was the world's reserve currency, the invisible weapon of U.S. power. But today, that rule is being challenged. In an unprecedented alliance, Africa, China, and Russia, backed by the BRICS bloc, have launched a $15 trillion gold trade framework, a system that bypasses the dollar entirely. And this time, it's not just symbolic, it's strategic, real, and unstoppable. Across Washington, think tanks are in crisis mode. Every global headline is asking the same question. Is this the moment the West loses control? Because this new system, centered around gold-backed trading and local currency exchanges, is more than economics. It's a political declaration. It says, we no longer need your dollar. In Africa, leaders call it the return of real value. In Beijing, they call it the gold standard 2.0. And in Moscow, it's being hailed as the economic weapon that replaces war. But how did we get here? Why now? And why is Africa, once seen as the world's raw material supplier, suddenly at the center of a $15 trillion revolution? It began quietly, with meetings between African finance ministers and BRICS economic envoys in Johannesburg and Addis Ababa. What started as small bilateral trade talks turned into the BRICS Africa Gold Settlement Initiative, a framework to trade commodities, oil, and technology without using U.S. dollars. For decades, African nations sold gold, cobalt, and oil for green paper backed by nothing but trust. Now, that trust is broken. Western sanctions, global inflation, and financial manipulation have convinced many that the dollar isn't a neutral tool. It's a control mechanism. And when Washington froze Russia's reserves in 2022, every developing nation took notice. If the world's wealth can be frozen with a political signature, then no one is safe. So, Africa, China, and Russia made a decision. Build a system based on real assets, gold, minerals, and tangible value. Not debt, not promises. And this time, the numbers are staggering. According to internal BRICS documents, the combined gold reserves involved exceed $15 trillion in value. That's more than the GDP of China, more than all U.S. dollars in physical circulation worldwide. In short, the world is changing, and the dollar is no longer the only game in town. This is the story of how BRICS and Africa just shocked the West, and how the world's richest continent is finally reclaiming its place in the global economy. The seeds of this alliance were planted years ago. As Africa's economies grew, so did their frustration with the dollar system. Inflation in the U.S. could suddenly make African exports cheaper or destroy local value overnight. It was a system where African nations produced real wealth, but earned paper wealth. By 2023, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, began formal talks to create a commodity-backed settlement system. But the turning point came when Russia and China proposed using gold as the stabilizing asset. The reasoning was simple. Gold is universal, apolitical, and finite. It can't be printed or sanctioned. African nations immediately saw the opportunity. Countries like Ghana, Mali, and Sudan hold some of the world's richest gold deposits. South Africa has one of the largest refining capacities. Zimbabwe recently reintroduced its gold-backed currency, the ZiG. Together, they formed the perfect foundation for a new trade standard. The BRICS Africa Agreement lays out an ecosystem. Gold from African nations will be used to collateralize trade. A new digital payment system, similar to SWIFT but independent, will settle transactions in local currencies. China's digital yuan and Russia's Mir payment network will provide the tech backbone. This isn't a fantasy. It's already being tested. In early 2025, Ethiopia and China conducted their first gold-backed oil trade worth over $800 million, settled without dollars. Niger and Russia followed suit for uranium exports. And Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, announced it will shift 40% of its oil exports to BRICS-based settlements within the next 2 years. The dominoes are falling. Each new deal weakens the dollar's global dominance. For the United States, this poses a nightmare scenario. The dollar's power comes not from its paper, but from global demand. If countries stop needing it for trade, the U.S. loses its biggest export, influence. And Africa's role in this shift is crucial. With over 40% of the world's gold reserves, 60% of critical minerals, and 30% of global oil discoveries, the continent holds the real keys to the new monetary system. For the first time in centuries, Africa isn't being mined, it's leading. When news of the BRICS Africa gold trade leaked, Western capitals scrambled. In Washington, emergency meetings were held at the Treasury and State Department. Analysts warned that if the dollar's use in trade drops below 40%, the U.S. could face a long-term inflation spiral. European banks echoed the concern. If the dollar weakens, their reserves weaken too. In Paris and London, financial analysts compared this to the collapse of the British pound's dominance in the 1940s. But this time, there's no Marshall Plan to restore control. This time, the Global South holds the advantage. The IMF and World Bank are also losing relevance. For decades, they dictated Africa's economic path, imposing structural reforms in exchange for loans. But now, African nations have new partners. China funds infrastructure. India provides tech. Russia supplies energy and defense. The UAE and Saudi Arabia invest in agriculture and logistics. In short, Africa no longer needs to borrow from the West. This economic independence terrifies Washington more than anything else. Because once a continent stops depending on your currency, it stops obeying your rules. U.S. officials tried to respond. They launched new diplomatic tours, offering trade incentives and warning African leaders about debt traps. But the old narrative doesn't work anymore. Today's African youth are informed, online, and proud. They see the hypocrisy. The same nations warning about debt are the ones printing trillions for their own economies. Meanwhile, BRICS expansion continues. In 2024, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nigeria officially joined the bloc, giving Africa a stronger voice than ever before. Their combined GDP exceeds $2 trillion, and that's before accounting for resource wealth. By aligning with BRICS, Africa is not isolating itself. It's integrating into a new global order. One where economic power isn't dictated from Washington or Brussels, but negotiated from Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Moscow. And that, to the West, is terrifying. The $15 trillion gold trade is more than an economic event. It's the birth of a multipolar world. It symbolizes the end of Western monopoly over finance and trade. As BRICS nations finalize their gold-backed settlement system, new trade corridors are emerging. The India-Middle East Africa corridor, linking ports from Mumbai to Mombasa. The Russia-Africa energy corridor, connecting gas pipelines and refineries. And China's digital Silk Road, bringing payment infrastructure and AI finance to African banks. Together, these networks form a powerful triangle, Africa, Asia, and Eurasia, that now controls most of the world's physical assets. In global markets, the shift is already visible. Central banks in Kenya, Ghana, and Egypt have increased gold reserves by over 60% since 2022. Even smaller economies like Senegal and Tanzania are following suit. For ordinary Africans, this means something far bigger than geopolitics. It means value is coming home. Gold, cobalt, and oil won't just leave the continent anymore. They'll anchor its wealth. The dream of Pan-African economic freedom, championed by figures like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara, is finally taking shape, not through speeches, but through economics. For the first time in modern history, Africa is not being divided by global powers, it's defining its alliances. And as Washington watches the dollar slowly lose its global grip, a new narrative emerges. Africa isn't the future of the world. Africa is the center of the new world. The world has entered a new era. A silent financial revolution is unfolding, led not by bombs or invasions, but by balance sheets and gold reserves. The U.S. dollar, once seen as unshakable, now faces competition from a coalition representing half of humanity. Africa, long underestimated, is now the bridge between the old order and the new. This transformation isn't anti-Western, it's post-Western. It doesn't reject cooperation, it redefines it. For Washington, this is the wake-up call of the century. Diplomatic influence is no longer enough. Economic dominance can no longer be assumed. The world is learning to live and trade without the dollar. In a quiet but powerful way, This is history repeating itself in reverse. Centuries ago, Africa's wealth fueled the rise of Europe. Now, Africa's wealth may reshape the balance of global power once again, but this time, under African terms. From the streets of Accra to the skyscrapers of Shanghai, from Moscow's trade halls to Johannesburg's stock exchange, the message is clear. The world is no longer owned by one currency or one country. And that, right there, is what shocked the West.
Welcome to African Spotlight 24, your premier source for news and current affairs from across the continent. We're glad you're here. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe, like, and turn on notification to stay up to date with the latest news and analysis. Your support helps us reach more people. Disclaimer: the content of this video is based on credible, publicly available information and is intended for educational, analytical, and informational purposes only. African Spotlight 24 does not promote hate, violence, misinformation, or political unrest. Our goal is to deliver thoughtful insights, highlight local voices, and encourage informed conversations throughout Africa.